Hello everyone, Alex Smith here, Rupert Honeywood from Business-Growth Bureau. Thank you so much for joining us once again. We're going to be talking about a bit of a boring subject today. I hope you're sitting down. We're going to be talking about GDPR. I know I've fallen asleep over this subject many a time, but it is important for all of us to learn. I'm going to hand it over to Rupert quite quickly on this one because I know very little about it compared to him. But what we're going to be talking about is if you're selling into Europe or the UK specifically, or Europe, sorry, is what you really need to bear in mind when you're doing that, and the kind of the repercussions that could be around that for you. But also, actually, we're also going to be kind of putting a bit of light about ways around that, not to duck under the red tape of it, but also just ways around that where you might be able to utilise in your own business. Now, you may already be doing it, or you may be able to learn about these ways moving forward. So, Rupert, what is GDPR to start with? More importantly, what is it? And why is it so boring?
Why is it so boring? Well, I think anything to do with GDPR just has to be boring, but unfortunately it has sort of semi-serious connotations, or certain types of organisations has serious connotations. It's a piece of legislation which originated from Europe, and even though the UK, as you may know if you're certainly in the UK and possibly from other countries, Britain, although it's leaving Europe allegedly, that GDPR is being adopted into, or has been adopted into UK legislation. The impact it really has is that, especially if you are a charity or an organisation which is predominantly selling into individual consumers as individuals rather than companies, the regulation is quite tight. So what it means in effect is people have had to have opted in. So where it's an issue, for example, is if you've got a charity which may have a donor database with, say, 500,000 people who are donors or supporters of the charities, then potentially there can be an issue with communicating with those people, because unless they've basically opted in again from an old list, the charities in some cases are losing perhaps 70 or 80% of their list they communicate with. We've come across 2 companies just like that, or organisations in the last few weeks who've been impacted in that way. Now, whilst it's a very boring subject, obviously for those type of organisations it has massive implications. If you're predominantly selling to other businesses, although there are implications there with the new legislation, it's much lighter touch. It's more about best practice, keeping the data safe, and a whole host of other things around that. From a legal point of view, I'm not going to pretend to try and advise people on that. Obviously, there's lots of people out there who are experts in that particular space. On a positive side, what I can say though is if you're using, say, LinkedIn, or possibly other social media platforms as well, is that because people will have had to opt in under the social network's terms and conditions, then broadly speaking, you're fairly safe to operate under that framework. So we've already been talking today about the importance of building the right type of lists, segmentation, prospect nurturing process, sales optimization, all those good things. The good news is despite GDPR, the processes we've recommended here are particularly GDPR friendly. So if you're a charity or another type of organisation which may be impacted by it, potentially we can give you some very good ways around that, and therefore you can sell a lot more stuff.
So onto that bit there, so thank you very much for that. Obviously, onto that bit there, what are maybe 2 or 3 really good ways around GDPR and ways that I can maybe function within my business, not only generate the right lead, but kind of avoid any horrible, what is it, £17 million or 4% of your global annual turnover?
Yeah.
How do I avoid those kind of charges? Because I don't know about you watching or listening, I don't have £17 million sitting around ready to get a fine from. So what ways can I use to avoid that? And what methods can I use to avoid that at the moment?
Right. Well, the very boring response would be to say, well, just make sure you comply with legislation, but that's not really what I want to say. The bottom line is, as I say, by using something like LinkedIn. Bear in mind, on LinkedIn, people have set their profiles to public, or 90% of people will have set their profiles to public. And so that's a great way of actually gaining more donations or sales. So you don't really have to worry about the GDPR part because it's already taken care of.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the bottom line. Just as much as possible, just think laterally, approach things from another angle.
Alternatively, let's flip this on its head. Let's make this work to our advantage. Start producing a lot more content where you're sharing a lot of value,
that's
and
a
get
really
people
good thing
to
to
come
do.
to you. Now, obviously, a lot of what we've been talking about and a lot of what marketing is going out. It's on the defensive. It's going out to people to get them to you, or sorry, to go out to people to get them to buy from you. But why don't companies, or why don't you consider avenues of getting people to come to you? So producing values, doing competitions, producing content around things where people not only consume your stuff, but also actually come to you and actually inquire with you. So instead of you going on the defensive all the time, you're on the offensive with it all. It's a much better approach.
Yeah.
Now, let's wrap this up because it is proper boring. Where do we go? Where is GDPR in the future? Where is it? How is it going to affect us in the future mainly? And what can I do right now to really safeguard myself against it?
Okay, to safeguard yourself from it, just follow obviously the regulations as best as you can. You can take out some form of assurance on it as well, just to try and protect your company or organisation. But as much as possible. As Alex has already referred to, if you can create lots of other type of conversations going on out there through content and other some form of media production, that's a really good thing. And then using something like LinkedIn, you use pay-per-clicks, obviously unaffected by this. What you can do on Instagram again and Facebook. Just go for it. But just try and avoid some of those tripwires which have been set before us, as it were.
Lovely. So thank you once again. Thank you, Rupert, for just taking a bit of time to explain that. For you guys watching, thank you so much for tuning in today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Alex Smith. This is Rupert Honeywood from Business Growth Bureau, and we've been talking about GDPR. Thank you very much for your time. We'll see you on the next episode.
Cheers.
Take care.